Hey there everyone, Hitesh here, back again with another video, and welcome to Internet's one of the most easiest and followable crash course on Angular. Whenever anybody tries to learn Angular, there is a lot of confusion with it. Some confusion regarding the version, some confusion regarding what should I know before starting with the Angular, and some confusion with the terminologies like directives and modules and a whole bunch of other things. So yes, it can be a little bit intimidating first for when you are getting started with Angular, but no worries, this video is going to solve a whole bunch of your problems if you want to get started with Angular. This crash course on Angular is designed specifically keeping in mind that a lot of beginners might be watching this course. Beginners who have no idea about React or Vue or any other framework. Beginners who really want to follow what I'm doing in this course exactly and want to repeat that after them. And also, you want to create a simple project after this crash course. So we're going to keep everything in mind and we're going to follow along exactly the same procedure to understand Angular. This video, this crash course on Angular, is divided into two major parts. The first part is all about the talks, the things that you should know before getting started with Angular, like what programming language, what this framework is, most confusing myths, and some of the terminologies and jargons and a whole bunch of other things. The second part of this video is about when we move on to our computer and we try to install Angular on our system, regardless of if you are on Windows or on the Mac. It's just really an easy process, and we will create a very simple basic project to understand the architecture of this framework itself and how we can write some of the basic code in Angular. It's going to be a whole easy process and I highly recommend you to follow along with me. It's going to be an absolute fun journey, so let's get started. Now, one more important thing, all of the exercise files and the code that I'll be using in this Angular crash course are actually available on my website learncodeonline.in, and along with the exercise file, this video is also uploaded on my main website, which is learncodeonline.in. And also I have enabled the discussion section so that in case you face any problem or you want to discuss something with your same like-minded people who are interested in coding and especially in the Angular, I have opened up the discussion section so that you guys can interact with each other, and I'm pretty sure the programming community is really kind enough to help you out in these crash courses. So don't hesitate, visit learncodeonline.in and take advantage of all the exercise files, code files, project files that we are going to create in this course. And in case you are still shying up to hit that subscribe button, don't do that. Please hit that like button as well as that subscribe button. It gives me a whole bunch of motivation and amazing feeling that yes, somebody is watching these content and are really enjoying that. Now, before we move ahead on to the very first section, I would like to ask you an important question. Based on your suggestion on my previous crash courses, I picked up this crash course topic. So in case you want me to create any other crash course or any other subject, please go ahead and mention that in the comment section below. I read all of them and I'll pick up the subject for another crash course based on your comment. So enough of the talk. Now let's talk about Angular. The very first thing, which is really a big thing when we get started with the Angular, is its version. And I totally understand this version thing in the Angular is so much of the massacre. It has stopped so many of the developers of jumping into Angular itself. Now let me clear this up. Angular 1 is something which you don't really want to learn. Anything which is after Angular 2 is something that you want to learn. Anything after Angular 2 is almost similar to its version 3, its version 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and a whole bunch of others as well. The important point is here, after Angular 1, Angular team decided to rewrite this entire framework, and after that, the version 2 and onwards is just some minor subtle updates which definitely are worth understanding and reading, but it's not something groundbreaking that's going to break entirely your project. So all the things that you're learning from Angular 2 and onwards are actually really great, and that's the only thing you want to learn. Angular is, of course, everybody knows, is one of the projects by Google and which focuses mainly on SPA, single page application. Now, it's not really a jargon thing. Nowadays, applications are moving more over onto single page application, and it's not really a big thing. Only thing is, of course, it's a big thing. The only difference is in multi-page application, you have multiple pages which renders again from the server, reloads and a whole bunch of other things. In the single page application, the browser is kind of a fake need in just having one page of the application. Of course, there's a lot of content, a lot of server rendering goes on, but only the content which actually is changed, actually that only re-renders. So it saves a whole bunch of time for everybody on the user side, on the server side. So it's a really good way of adapting our application into single page application, and Angular is one of them. Now, Angular is big and there is no thought about it. Angular is definitely a big framework. It's not something like React or Vue or any other framework that you have heard around. Angular in itself consists of all the packages that you need to build an application, and you rarely need something support from outside the world of Angular. Surely sometimes you do. But the major thing with the Angular is that all the things, most common ones like routing or the state management, or maybe if you want to interact with web like APIs and all these things, are actually done directly in the Angular itself. In the world of React or Vue, we have to install third-party libraries and support to get started with something like routing or state management like Redux. Surely Redux is possible in Angular as well, but you actually don't need it much. All the things are actually packed in one framework, and if you're going to pack everything into one framework, it's definitely going to be a little bit bigger. Now, one more thing that you're going to hear about this Angular is it follows the MVC concept. Now, to be fairly honest with you, MVC is moreover a practice of how we write our code, and it can be followed up in almost any modern framework. It's not like just a thing or advantage of Angular. Surely Angular does support it pretty widely and pretty openly, but it is possible of following MVC pattern in almost any other framework as well. So I would not consider this as a special gem that is only in the Angular. Okay, the one more important thing that you should know before getting started with Angular is we write all of our code in Angular in TypeScript. Now, some of you might be worrying, I don't know TypeScript. Now, technically, most of you don't actually need to understand the TypeScript because you can adapt the TypeScript feature if you know JavaScript a little bit. Now, for example, this is JavaScript and this is TypeScript. I know you might have heard this too many times that TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, which is fairly an accurate definition, means everything that you do in JavaScript is definitely possible in TypeScript as well. Even you can write your entire code just with JavaScript. But TypeScript gives you some of the more advantages like defining the data types and a whole bunch of other things to get rid of all of the weakness that is present in the JavaScript and move into a very subtle and rock solid programming language. Now, one more thing with the Angular is its command line interface. Now, this command line interface you definitely are going to find in something like React, Vue, or any other framework as well. But in the case of Angular, this is more powerful. I'm not going to say like super heavy powerful like Superman, but a little bit more. What it does, in the world of Angular, whenever you need to create any new component or any new file or any new component or anything else, it not only just installs that package for you, but also creates some of the template file for you. And a lot of people love that I don't have to create a bunch of other files. What are the required files is automatically being generated for me. That's actually a good thing in some cases and equally bad in some cases, but moreover, people actually love this feature. In the world of Angular, the jargons are no easy, and you're going to find them in all of the places. Things like directives, modules, and a whole bunch of injection, dependency injection, observables. These are the things which can scare away a lot of people, but trust me, they are no big deal. Eventually, you understand them automatically when you build a couple of projects. Now, surely we can talk about the definitions of directives and modules and a whole bunch of other things. In fact, in the documentation of Angular, they heavily differentiate between the modules and ng modules and a whole bunch of other things. To be honest, I think that is like too much for a beginner and you should not go much into the depth of that in the initial level. I highly recommend to create instead a couple of projects so that these directives and these injections automatically becomes clear to you. Okay, so I will not go much into the depth of these jargons like directives and services and modules, but I'm going to say just one thing. Surely we're going to understand them more into the code section, but there is one thing that I would like to talk here is modules. Angular is packed with a whole bunch of modules. So let's just say you want to take input from the user. We mostly use forms for that. We have a module for that. Let's just say you want to interact with some API on the web. We have a module for that. You don't need to install much of the third-party things. Just call something from the core of Angular or maybe some modules of Angular, and it's going to be all done. So that's the only thing you should keep in mind. Surely that's going to become much more clear in the later part when we're going to code actually a project in Angular. Okay, so now that some of the bits and pieces about the Angular is absolutely clear, it's absolutely the time to hit that subscribe button first. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and also share this video with your friends so that they can at least get started with something like with this crash course. And don't forget to hit that comment section as well. I'm reading all of those comments. If you have some time, please write some comment about what should be the next crash course. It really motivates me to do something, and I really appreciate that. Okay, enough of that. Now, let's go ahead and move on to my computer so that we can actually code something on Angular. You don't need much of the tools, and you can be on any system. Mac, Windows, doesn't really matter. As long as you have an access to a command line interface and some code editor like VS Code, it's gonna be all okay. That's the only thing we are gonna need. It's a super lightweight, so you don't need to have like gigs and gigs of RAM. You can work on that easily. So now, without talking much further, let's go ahead and move on to computer and create a very simple, very basic and amazing project in Angular on my computer. Catch you there. Welcome to my computer where I record thousands of video every year. So let's get started with the talk on Angular. And in this part, this is the second part of the crash course, we're going to actually understand some of the basic documentation, and we're going to create a simple project using Angular that's going to give you a head start in understanding the directives, the injection, and a couple of other things. It's going to be a rather simple project. I highly recommend you to follow along with me. So what do you need to follow along with this? Now, since Angular is a little bit dependent on the Node.js, you don't need to be a master of Node.js. It just needs to be installed on your system. It's available for Mac, Windows, and Linux, and there is no such big tricky thing to install it. It's very easy. So go ahead and download the latest version for your operating system and just go for the LTS version. Once you have got Node installed, then we are going to work on it in a minute. And the next thing that I highly recommend you to visit is angular.io, the official website of Angular, where you can find a lot of things that's going on with Angular, including some of the features that Angular openly just admits that these are the amazing things we do, and a whole bunch of other things. Now, one of the quick thing that I would like to point your attention on this website is on the very right side, the GitHub button of the Angular. Now, GitHub is a very good resource to find out what's happening in the code itself. For example, if you'll go a little bit there at the bottom, you're going to see learn about the latest improvement. And you can see here that what is the latest version that is going on in the Angular. Does these revamps in the update itself is going to affect your project or not? This is a nice way to keep a track on that. And of course, we do have breaking changes. They always mention that what are the breaking changes that are going to be happening that might impact your project itself. And as you can see, the latest version is 9 point something up here, which is going on, and they have a pretty insane cycle of revamping their code. These are like one of the fastest team that is managing any framework. They just roll out back-to-back updates and new features and all of these amazing. So see, you can see that in 2019, 5th, it was the 8.1 beta, and you can see up here at the top in 2019 on the 9th month they have rolled out another version. So it's a rapidly growing framework in itself. Now moving back onto our Angular website itself, let's go back there. Now another thing which I would like to point here is actually the resources. Now most of the time we are going to be working with the VS Code, our choice of editor. Surely it can be Sublime Text or any other, but this Angular actually gives you a couple of other resources on which you can write your code. One of the most popular one is MXCO, which is a web-based drag and drop IDE, but most of the coders actually prefer to use either VS Code or maybe WebStorm to work with that. So these are the most popular one, but surely there's no shortage of that. For the tooling, most of the time we use the Angular CLI. Don't worry, it's going to be installed in your system within a minute, but there are others as well. Most of the time this Angular CI is the most common one, which can do most of the job. So these are the basic ones, and I highly recommend to check out that. Maybe you are interested in finding some of the data libraries or UI components. So it's mentioned up here, but only a few people actually check it out on the official website up here. Okay. Now, another thing which you will be using quite a lot is the documentation up here. Now, Angular documentation can be really massive, and it's pretty easy to get lost in the documentation. So I'll point out some of the things that from where you can get started so that you don't get lost up there. The first and foremost is not to check out the get started. No, you don't want to check out directly this one. You'll find yourself lost. You want to start directly from the setup. So this is the one that we are having here. Now, first and foremost is install the Angular CLI. And if we just check it out, Angular CLI, let me zoom that a little bit. It's going to say that npm install -g @angular/CLI. This is the first step. The second step is to create a project, which is done by the ng. As soon as you install Angular, a new command is being allotted in your system, which says ng. And yes, Angular stands for ng. The A is, just remove the A and then this is ng. So this is, it's coming up from. And then we can run the application by browsing into the application and simply saying ng serve -- open. So there we go. No big deal. Pretty easy. Now here's a quick gotcha for all of you. When you're going to copy this command npm install -g, just click up here at the top. Now the gotcha is only for the Mac and for the Linux user. Windows user, please open up your terminal or command prompt from the administrative privileges. If you're using the Git bash, absolutely awesome. A big thumbs up for you. For all other people, just make sure you open up your command prompt using administrative privileges. A Mac user don't have any such thing, so you have to use sudo for that. So I'm going to write this command in the terminal, but first and foremost, on my desktop, I have created a new folder which says Angular Crashy, because that's a classic name for having a crash course. And when I do a quick ls, means dir on Windows, it has nothing. It's just an empty folder. Now, what you have to do is just paste this command up here, which is npm install -g. By the way, -g means I want to install it globally so that I can access it whenever and wherever the folder is. I want to access it from anywhere. So just go at the very start of this command and just write sudo if you're on a Mac and Windows. Mac and Linux. Windows users, you don't need to do that. Again, Windows users don't need to put this sudo. Once you're going to hit that enter, it's going to ask you for a password. Just go ahead and give it a password. Mine is already installed, so I'm not going to run this one command, but for you, it is very important to run this. Okay, let's go ahead and see what is the next in the setup. In the next setup, it says you can use ng and new to create a fresh new project. I'm going to click copy on that, and I'm going to go ahead and on this terminal, I'm going to paste that. So ng, new, and then it says my-app. I'm not going to call it as my-app. I'm going to call this as simply YouTube ANG for Angular, just a random name that we have come up here. We're going to hit enter. Now it's going to go onto the GitHub and it says, would you like to Angular routing? Now, surely you can add Angular routing here, which is going to give you aspect of how you can route multiple pages, but we're creating a very simple page. We don't need routing, but you definitely can add routing later on as well. No problem in that. If you know your application is going to be big, gigantic from the very start, then surely add routing for that. It's just a matter of saying yes or no. I'm going to create N here. So I don't need routing as of now because it's a very simple project. Just having an extra file is not going to make any sense for this small project. So let's hit N and hit enter. Now it's going to ask you that what are the style sheet format would you like to use? Now, just to give you a brief idea, I do have course on SAS, not SCSS, on the SAS on YouTube as well. So go ahead, check out my playlist or visit Learn Code Online. I do have a separate library there as well to understand more about the SAS, which is like CSS on steroids. But as of now, just to directly talk to a wider audience, we're going to keep it to the base CSS only. We're going to hit enter, and now it's going to go onto the GitHub. We'll fetch some of the files from the GitHub and we'll create a small template which is just ready to go. We can start that project directly, means everything is configured properly and everything is just awesomely working fine. And one thing I really appreciate with the Angular guy is how they have modified the template which is given directly to us compared to the previous template. Previous template was ugly. This one is much more beautiful. Not a big deal. Usually we just delete this template, but it looks good to have a good template. Okay. Now it's going to take a little bit while to download all these stuff for us. In the meantime, I would like to walk you through with a couple of things which are also important. Now, if you'll check onto the documentation, which of course you are going to do a lot, you're going to look onto the fundamentals here. Now, they have created a hero app which helps you to walk through with the Angular, and they talk about a lot of things. For example, in the architecture, they talk about modules, components, service, and a whole bunch of things. There are also forms and observables. Sorry for that, and bootstrapping and ng modules and a whole bunch of other things. I don't recommend you to directly watch this or to read that one. First, I recommend you to watch this video, complete that, and then only to move into what are these modules and how to use them and all a bunch of things. Directly walking into these modules may actually create a little bit confusion for you. So surely it's important to have an idea of what these are, but we're going to talk about them a little bit later. So my recommendation is to go into the architecture a little bit later. Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk about that. Surely they have a very, very detailed and thorough documentation, but that's also the reason of some of the confusion. Okay, so let's go up here. Our package is almost installed. And come on, just last few minutes. Would you like to help Google with the privacy policy? Probably a video for another day about how much privacy is being accepted here. Right now, I'm going to give all the yes settings up here. Otherwise, it bothers us a little bit. Okay, so it says everything is done nicely and rightly. I'm going to hit just clear screen. Do a quick ls to see that yes, there is a project in my directory. I'm going to walk into that project by saying cd youtube-ang, hit enter. Hit an ls again, and you're going to see a whole bunch of files are available to us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my code editor here. So what I can do is there are a couple of ways I can do it from the command line as well, but I think it would be much more easier for a whole bunch of other people if I just open up my code editor and just open this up and drag and drop it here. Okay, that's one of the most easiest way to open that up file. Surely you can write up here, just say code and a dot, and it's going to open up an editor indirectly in this file. But I want not to be in this file. I want to be this way. Okay. Now let's go back onto the setup introduction because there is third step being involved up here. So let's go into the setup and the third step. There we go. It says walk into your project and then say ng serve -- open. So we're going to do exactly the same. Let's go onto the command line terminal and we are going to say ng space serve and -- open. By the way, ng serves a whole bunch of command, which you can check out by having an ng help. I'll talk about that probably in some other video, not right now. We're going to hit enter, and now it's going to open up a browser, a project into the browser, which actually, to be honest, looks absolutely beautiful, and I love it. I just love it how they have crafted this page compared to the previous one. Nice SVG graphics, some of the new things, how to generate the component. This is directly being given to us. This is how you generate any component. And the beautiful part is it's also going to create the template file for you. So you can just click on this new component, Angular material, dependency, run watch test, build for production, a lot of things that you can have a little bit of walkthrough and reading. And also at the here it says YouTube ANG. So somehow it's taking the project name up here and app is running. Also notice this YouTube ANG is also at the top. So from somehow this is actually looks like this is coming up from a variable. Now let's go ahead and take a look on to our file, that how it looks like. So it's time to just expand the screen with our VS Code. Take advantage of the full real estate. There we go. Okay. So, of course, most of the time we just directly jump into the source file. There we go. And we can see a whole bunch of things in the source file. It's a really gigantic thing that's going on up here. So let me walk you through with the architecture of this Angular. In this Angular project, you are always going to find two JSON files. Both of them are really, really important. So the first JSON file, we have actually many JSON files up here. The first one is the package.json. This package.json file actually involves all the packages that are required to run this Angular project. For example, the most important one is Angular core, which includes core functionality of Angular. But we do have Angular router as well. We have got animations, compiler. I told you, it's a gigantic project, so there we go. There is some dev dependencies as well. These are not being taken into the production itself, but these are like for your own things, like some of the Jasmine stuff and all these stuffs. So these are like developer dependencies. And the good thing is we usually don't touch this file. We usually interact with this file using command line if we want to install anything new. So there we go. This is the most important file number 1. Another file, the most important file number 2 is angular.json. This angular.json file is one of the files where you mention a whole bunch of other things. For example, these are style sheets where you mention, again, these are global style sheet. I'll walk you through the difference in them between them as well. There are some things like assets being that you want to import and a whole bunch of other things that you are having. So this is another important file that you should actually keep an eye. And in some of the bigger projects, actually, we touch this file a lot. Okay, so now that you understand what are the 2 important files that you have to take care, you can actually, in the initial level, you can ignore the files like tsconfig.app.json or tsconfig.json. Surely they are important, but they are just there. You don't need to worry too much about them unless you are specifically editing them. And we are not going to talk much about this git ignore because I have talked a whole bunch of things about it in my other git course. Right now, it's not going to impact us much. Okay. Now moving on to the meat part of this application, which is source. In the source, again, you're going to see a whole bunch of things, including an index.html file, which is pretty good. We just have to notice one thing here, which says app-root. Apart from that, we can ignore everything here. Okay, just keep in mind that. Okay, this is all good. We have a main.ts as well. We don't actually bother much this file as well. Just keep it there. Just keep it there. And then we have got style.css, and this is the global styling. Remember I told you in just a moment ago that in the Angular JSON this file is mentioned. This actually impacts the entire web page. The single page application says that it's going to be just one page in the entire application. So in our index.html, it just says I just have one component in my body, which is app root. So everything is injected or inserted in this app root itself. Pretty easy, not a big deal. Okay. Moving further, we usually don't touch this environment. We usually don't touch in the assets unless we actually want to insert some of these assets up here. Okay, and then we have got this app as well, which is a little bit tricky part up here. So this app is now currently serving a component. You can add more component here. Remember, we just saw the command to add components here, which says ng generate component and xyz. So xyz is the name, generate component is a command to generate the component. And whenever you're going to generate a component, it's also going to generate relevant file for that component. What are those relevant file? Every time a new component is being added, it adds a CSS file for that. It adds an HTML file for that component. It also adds this spec.ts file, which is moreover a testing file. And you can find that out using these describe, before each, and it. I have talked about extensively that why these files are being created, why it is being called it and everything in my MongoDB series. So in case you want to check that out. Currently in this one, we are not going to touch the testing part. Then we have app component.ts, which is moreover like a brain of this component. So everything that is happening, like changing of the variable names, some calculation that is being done is actually going to happen in this component.ts. And then we have got finally the module.ts, which is like the main modules. And you might be thinking a lot is going on here. And you're right, a lot is going on in here. We're going to come back onto this later on. First and foremost, we want to play around a little bit because playing with the file gives more of a confidence feeling. So what we're going to do is, first and foremost, let's have a look on this component.ts file. By the way, every file is going to have an extension of .ts, which means it's a TypeScript file, but you can actually write almost the JavaScript up here. In fact, this right now here is like moreover a JavaScript instead of simple TypeScript. And what would be a TypeScript in that? TypeScript would be something like where you have mentioned the data type up here. For example, this would be a more accurate version of a TypeScript, but surely we can ignore that as of now. Not in a real Angular project. I would highly recommend to use or take the full advantage of TypeScript. So right now, let's just get rid of that. Let's not make too much thing buggy up here. So we can see we have a title that says YouTube-ang. We can verify that this title is coming up here as well, YouTube-ang. Now let's go ahead and change this and have a little bit fun here. So I want to change this title to something different. I want to call this as project CC for Crash Course, not Creative Cloud of Adobe. So we're going to save that and let's just go ahead. It automatically re-renders the project and we can see project CC up here. Okay, so it's good that we are able to see or change some of the things, not much, but I want to add more fun stuff up here. And in order to add more fun stuff, I need to understand this component file. So I think it's a good time to talk a little bit onto that. So first and foremost, we can see that we have got an import statement, which is importing a component from the Angular core. This Angular core is like a meat part of the Angular, which includes major of the functionality of Angular. And from that, we are just importing a component. Then after that, this is something known as decorator. Now this decorator is a concept which is available in a couple of other programming languages like Python as well. And it's moreover like a templating stuff. And right now you just need to understand that every component needs to have a decorator and some of the properties being available up here. The first and the foremost very important property is the selector. Remember, the selector that you can see up here is the app root. So what it's going to do, it's going to look into your web page where this app root is. App root is almost like an h1 tag or p tag or any other tag. Remember, let me just show you in the index.html, you saw this app-root. So in our regular HTML, we don't have app-root, but in the Angular, React, we can actually, not in React actually, but in a couple of other frameworks, we can actually define our own selectors. So this is the where it's going to look for. So this app component is going to go into your web page, will find and will look for this app root. Wherever it finds the app root, it injects your code there. So that's kind of your injection. Then we have a template URL as well, where your template URL is. Right now it's in the current folder, which is just the HTML file. Then it says the style URL as well. This is component CSS. These are the styling and HTML for your just one component. It can be just a button as well. It can be anything, but it's not a CSS for the entire web page. You're going to see the difference in a minute. Okay, so there we go. This is what we are having. Then we are having an export of the class, which is app component itself, and it's calling a title of project CC. Okay, good. So far good. Now how we can create more stuff. Now let's just say we create more stuff. We're gonna call it as date. And how do we define a new date in JavaScript? We're gonna simply say new date, and there we go. We got a new date up here. So pure JavaScript. Surely it's not gonna give you the exact date. It's gonna be a long string, moreover that. But surely we are having something here. So let's just save this. Now what we want to go is we want to go into this app component.html. And we can see it's a lot of things going on up here. Lot of things. First and foremost, I can easily spot that this is a pure CSS going on. Okay, no big deal. As I keep on scrolling, we can see some CSS, SVGs are going on. I'm looking forward to find out where things are going on. So we can see that there is something learn Angular and CLI documentation. So I want to change some stuff here. So one good idea is that I want to change something just with below this resources. So I have to find that. One good way is just press Control F or Command F and just look for the word resources. There we go. I can find it on line 353 in case you are still lost. And we can see just below the H2, I can write some of the stuff that can be totally mine. And also if you'll scroll a little bit above there, 344, you're going to see in the title, it says some of the curly braces and then title and something app is running like that. So we have no idea what that is right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to create again an H2 tag. Okay. And we're going to write something up here that says like it works. It works with a couple of exclamation. Let's just save that and see if we are doing some right editing. There we go. It says it works. Okay. Step 1 is okay. Now look into the app component.ts. We have got this title, but we have got a new variable, which is date. So let's go ahead and inject this date up here. So how we can do that? We're going to remove this it works. And in case you want to inject any variable, you have to use 2 curly braces up here. A little bit weird syntax, but yeah, that's how it is. And then you can use any variable just right here. So save that date. And let's see if we are going to get the date here. Oh, there we go. We got a date, Monday, September, and it's a pretty long date according to Indian Standard Time because I live in the beautiful country of India. Moving further. Here's a quick assignment that all of you have to do. Now you have to do something really awesome. You have to create a variable in the app component which is going to be your name. So just create a variable name and insert your name in that variable. Now go ahead in the app component. I want to create just below this p tag, just create an h1 tag. It's a little bit weird, but yeah, just below the p tag, create an h1 tag and inject your name there. It's going to be absolutely fun. So just go ahead and do that. Yes, I'm waiting for you to do it. Okay, I hope you have paused the video and you have done that. Now let's move forward and talk a little bit more stuff onto this app component now that you know how to create variable. Now variable has a lot of data types in the TypeScript, and that is moreover a concept that we can discuss on some of the TypeScript course, but right now we are just going to be ignoring the types of that. Remember I told you title, colon, string, something like that? Yeah. Okay. Moving forward, since it's a class, and in case you have studied any of my course, we have talked on to like object-oriented programming, you know that all the classes have a constructor. And in this specifically, the TypeScript, you don't need to name the constructor like we usually do. Like constructor should be named exactly same as the class name. In here, we don't need to do that. We just need to call constructor. It automatically understands that you want to just call the constructor. Okay, so in the constructor, we can actually log something like constructor called, something like that, which would be an amazing thing to do. But surely you can do more stuff, like you want to fill an array with some data coming up from database or anything. You can actually do that. Pretty easy and fairly easy stuff. You can also create your customized method, like something like do something, if I can write that's correct. Do something, and there we go. This is like the basic method that you can have. You can accept parameters in that. For example, you want to accept a value which is going to be of type string. Everything is in lowercase. And what this method is going to return, it's not going to return, like for example, if it returns any number, you can write a number up here. If it's not going to return anything, you can just simply say void. That's also a good thing. And once you have accepted this value, you can do whatever you like. You can change its casing, like uppercase, lowercase, or you can change the value totally itself. For example, I just want to call it as awesome. So you can just go ahead and do that whenever this method is being called. So there we go, pretty easy stuff and not at all a big deal. For example, the date is right here, but as you know, the constructor is the very first thing which is being called when you call any class or instantiate any object from it. I can call this do something up here. And just for some bizarre reason, maybe you want to pass on a date up here. So you can just go ahead and just say, maybe you can pass on a date directly, or maybe you can pass on some value like something, my name, probably my name. So you can do all these stuff. But again, this is something that you know already, the basic stuff that you can define any method up here. We're going to surely do that. Okay, now let's go ahead and get rid of all of this. This is all the basic stuff that we wanted to have. And I think you got a little bit of the confidence that how things are going to be working up here. Now, one more thing that I want to talk about is the styling, which is a common misconception. So notice here, app component CSS is totally blank, but we have this style.css at the top. So this is like a global style, and this app component.css is a component specific styling. For example, right now our page is pretty big and pretty long, so it's not going to be differentiable, but always keep in mind that thing that you want to apply specifically to component, maybe a button, maybe a form, that should be written only in the app component CSS. If you want a styling to be applied to the entire page, maybe body, maybe HTML, that should majorly, or that is impacting like all of the buttons, that should actually go into the style.css. Keep in mind, the style.css is globally, the component.css is for component only, a very common confusing point. Okay. Now we are going to do some of the amazing stuff. Let me close all these files and we're going to do and work on some of the amazing stuff. Okay, first and foremost, what you have to do is go ahead and download the style sheet that is being provided to you. It's available at Learn Code Online in my crash course as an attachment. So go ahead and download the style sheet, because this is not a crash course on the styling. This is rather a crash course for the Angular. So we're going to just paste a simple styling sheet. So go ahead and paste that. It's not a big deal that we are doing up here. We are having some of the stylings for the logo. We are having some of the stylings for input text, some of the list items, some of the add button, app title, unordered list, and a container. Not at all a big deal. So this is what we are having, and make sure you save that as well. Okay, that's the step number 1. Now for this particular exercise, we are also going to need a logo. So the logo is also given to you in the attachment. So please go ahead and download this logo. Where we want to place this logo? We want to place this logo in the assets. So go ahead and directly paste that into the assets. Okay, so I have went ahead and I have pasted this logo.png file just right there. So you can just go ahead and do that. And we have actually got the logo styling as well. So we don't need to touch this file again. This is just a classic CSS. Okay, moving on to the app component.html. Now shortly, we have played it with quite a lot, and we can do all of our working just right in here. But actually right now, I really don't want to do that. So it can a little bit scary, but just select all of this and remove everything up here. So this is what we want to do next, just remove everything up here. Now we're going to write some of the styling for this up here. So let's go ahead and do that. First and foremost, we're going to have a little bit of the division up here. Now, in the component itself, it is recommended that you use just one division, and that should comprise all of your things. Surely that can be one case, but again, it depends on what kind of code you're writing, what kind of project you are building up. Then we are going to have an image. So there we go. The source of the image is going to be .. means I want to go into one directory back, which is going to be assets, and then logo.png. And I'm going to hit enter so that everything is on its separate line. Much more easier for us to actually just take a look. In the alt, I'm going to say LCO logo. Make sure you always put an alt, because sometimes it's harder to find that where is my logo and something like that. Width is going to be just 100, and the height is also going to be 100. So we are hard coding that value. And make sure you also don't forget to pick up a class for logo up here. Okay. And what we can do in this division is we can just write a simple line of style that says text align to be center. There we go. Okay, so this is all done. Our image and logo is up here, and it should be appearing on the web page itself. So there we go. Nice little small logo. Okay, moving further. Just after this image, we are going to insert a title that what this application is all about. So we're going to have an h1 tag. H1 is also going to have a class that we have created, app-title. There we go. And we're going to simply say LCO to do list. There we go. Shouldn't be a much big deal as of now. And then just after this division, we're going to create another division. Shortly after that, you can wrap this entire thing into a further division to follow the guidelines. But I'm going to just go ahead and create another division, which is going to have a class of container. Okay, there we go. And after this container, we are going to simply write add a to-do with the triple dots. There we go. Save that, and let's see how does that look. Okay, we are not able to see that, but it is just right there. So it is just up here, LCO to-do list. We are going to fix that up in a minute. Just go ahead and just work on that. Looks like, actually we can fix that up by having a color of this class, app-title. Let's go into the CSS and look for the app title. There we go. The color is this one. We can actually change that to C1, 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 which is a nice grayish color. Should be easy to see. There we go. Pretty okay. Moving further, we're going to go into this HTML part. We have now a to-do. So first and foremost, let's have a line break so that it doesn't bother us much. And then we want an input. And this input is going to be of type text. So input colon text. There we go. And I'm going to again hit everything onto the next line because it's much more easier for you to understand and see everything. And we don't need an ID as of now, so I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, so we have got type, and we actually don't need the name as well, but we definitely need a class. So there we go. Class is going to be input dash text. And further, we are going to place a placeholder, which is going to say type to do. Okay, there is a little bit more things that's going to come up into this input segment up here. We're going to keep that a little bit onto the later phase. So just keep a reminder up here that this input is not done. It requires a few values. For example, I want to add a feature that whenever I hit enter, it should also behave like I have clicked on add item. So we are going to fix that in a little bit later. Okay. And I'm also going to add a slash so that input is complete. Now we're going to add a button up here. So let's go ahead and add a button. This button is going to have a class of add dash btn. And this is going to just say something like add to do. Now, surely this button is also not complete because we haven't added the functionality of how things can add. So there we go. This is a nice type of to do, very small one, and we have got add to do. So styling is also checking in nicely. Now, the next thing that we are going to have is another division, which is gonna like keep up a stack of all the to-dos that are going up. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And we are going to just have a div of class list, which is also already going to kick in because we have styling. And we are going to have an unordered list. Inside the unordered list, we are going to have a list item, which is not going to have any class as of now. But this list item is surely going to have an input of type checkbox. Checkbox, there we go. And it is also going to have a name that is going to be is done. We can actually manipulate this is done using the database later on, but right now we're not going to do much into that. And just after the input, we are going to have a value. I'm going to call this as task1. This is hard coded as of now. Surely we're going to fix that later on. And just after that, we are going to have a button, which is going to have a class of btn. And we're going to call this as delete. Right now it's not going to delete, but only the CSS is going to kick in. So there we go. And this is how it looks like right now. We have a check mark. We are not going to manipulate the CSS like to check it off or something as of now. Surely we can do that later on. Right now we have the CSS and this add to do. Now I want to show you something really very specific up here. So let's go into the app component CSS, actually app component CSS at the very top. And I want to do something crazy up here. I'm going to select a body. I'm going to apply a styling to the body, which is going to be background color. That is going to be 000. So it's absolutely black. When I save and run this, notice up here, it's not actually taking place. Why is it happening? And this is exactly, I was talking about the confusion point of people, because this CSS is actually just for the component, and your component doesn't actually comprises of the body. It just starts from the division directly. So this kind of CSS, if you want to apply something to everything, this actually usually goes into your style.css. So here, if I apply this one and save that, now notice the styling is actually kicking in directly. So these are the things that you should always keep in mind whenever you're applying. Surely in the CSS, you can do a better job of expanding this more. But again, this is not a class for CSS. This is moreover a class for Angular itself. Okay, so the design and the styling and the template part is all good. Now let's go ahead and talk more on to the functionality part, which is actually the part that I love. So for the functionality part, I'm going to introduce a couple of more things to you. Let's save that, and we can actually close all of this to avoid confusion. Okay, now I'm going to go into this my app folder, and I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to create a new file. This new file is going to be called as todo.ts. Make sure TS is important because it's a TypeScript file. Okay, now what we're going to do in this. Now you might have noticed that I told you in the earlier video segment that Angular actually follows a lot about MVC. This is almost a part of it, but we are not keeping it in a separate folder calling models itself. Now in the Angular, we want to create a to-do. So what are the properties these to-dos should have? So these are the things we are going to define. It's almost like defining a class, but in the class we add functionality. In this type of data type, we don't actually add functionality. We just add a definition of it. For example, of course, I want to export that. It is known as interface. And this concept of interface is actually very well explained in the Swift documentation, but I'm pretty sure you're not going to go there. So let me tell you how this actually works. First, let's write a to-do interface. So in the to-do interface, what I want to do, my to-do should obviously have an ID that should have a number. Okay, that's nice. What else should it have? It should have a value that is going to be of type string, obviously. And then we are going to have is done, which can be manipulated by a variety of things. And that should be a Boolean. There we go. So this is my to-do. In the interface, we usually never write the functionality part. Like, for example, if you see in the class, when we were talking about the class, we created a constructor, we created a method in that. In the to-do interface or any interface, we never write the functionality part. We write how it should be. It's just general properties about it, that these are the rules that this is going to follow, and it's never going to break. We surely can add more things like required, not required, and it should be absolutely compulsory, but right now it just is okay. We're going to close this. So this is a very easy thing. Surely we can add more properties, but we have to deal with them as well. Okay. Now let's go ahead on to the brain of this component. So a quick question, what is the brain of this component? And in case you answered module.ts, you're absolutely wrong. In case you answered component.ts, you are absolutely right in that case. So now we're going to work on this app component.ts. Okay, so in this component, what we're going to do, in this one, we're going to write some of the functionalities up here. First and foremost is you have to import your template that you have designed for to do. How do we do that? And by the term template, I mean that interface we have defined. So we're going to simply have an import statement, and from where we want to bring it up, /todo. Now we don't need to write /todo.ts because it's already compiled in the Angular framework that whenever there's a TS extension, you can just avoid that. What is the file name that you want to call it? I want to call it as to do. You can actually call it anything lowercase to do, uppercase, but I'm going to call this as to do. So save that. This is the step number 1 that we have to do. Now in the component, we actually, in case we want to generate a new component also, these things like these this code is actually being generated automatically by the Angular itself. So right now we are not doing anything extra here. Okay, moving further into the app component, we can actually get rid of this title. Title is good actually. I'm not going to get rid of this, although we are not using it, but still for some reason I just love it. We're going to add a couple of more our variables. The first variable that we are going to have is to do value. This is going to be actual to do itself. So we're going to call this as simply string. And we also need a list. Now, what is this list for? Now, you might have already guessed that we have this to do here. And this to do is going to be a list. That means an array. So we have to loop through this array. So that's why we are creating a list here. We're calling it as a list, which is going to be a list not of any type of array, but actually an array of to do. So that's how we define it. There we go. Pretty easy. I hope you can understand that pretty easy. Now comes up an interesting part, which I really want to discuss. Now, in recent, most of the libraries and frameworks that you are seeing up here, you might have noticed they actually comes up with something known as lifecycle methods. These lifecycle methods are very much inspired by the mobile apps. In the mobile apps, we have many methods like what will happen as soon as the app is just opening up. What will happen when app will go in the background or is about to just go in the background or is coming up from the background or is just about to come live from the background. So there is these lifecycle method that was first introduced in the mobile apps, but later on, web applications find out that this is an amazing concept and we want to have it. So that's why you're going to see these lifecycle events quite often in these frameworks. And one of these lifecycle event is on init. So in the world of Angular, we have on init. So this is the method that we are having. But since this is an Angular method, usually most of the things you're going to see are prefixed with the word ng for fun purpose. I don't know what else that ng is serving up here. Okay, so this is an ng on init. So as soon as the on init means as soon as this component is about to be initialized, what we really want to do. First and foremost, since we are not taking up anything from the database or anything, we want to flush out this list. So we're going to say list is going to be just empty. Now, if we are bringing up list from an API or from a database, we really want to populate this on init method. And also I want to make sure that this dot, and again, in case you want to refer any variable, we use this here. So what we want to do is we want to say this dot to do value means the value should be empty. So we're going to just empty out that so that there is nothing typed already into this. Surely we can put up a value up here that is going to be already typed up into the box or the input box. We really don't want to do that. Okay. Now moving up here, let's just save this, come back up here. Now there are two functionality which we want to focus more. What happens when I click on this add to do and what happens when I click on this delete button. That's it. Surely we can incorporate more handling APIs, database, MySQL, MongoDB, but that would be a full-fledged course, not a crash course, and it will definitely scare you off. So we're going to create just two functionality. What happens when to click on add to do? What happens when I click on delete? Let's go ahead and add these functionality. It's going to be absolutely simple. So for that, we define a method, add item. Let's call it that way. And there we go. So what happens when I click on add item? First and foremost, I want to check whether somebody is trying to add empty value in that. So I'm going to create just a simple if statement. I'm going to say this dot to do, come on, suggest me, to do value is not equals to empty. If that is the case, then only I want to do certain things. What are those certain things? I want to create an object of type to do, and I want to add all the properties that I have mentioned in todo.ts. So let's go ahead and do that. Const, let's call it as new item, and this new item is of type to do. And what are the values that's going to store? Of course, I know the value is going to be ID, then the next value is going to be value itself, and finally we are going to have is done. So these are the three things that I have to take care. The ID, surely I can incorporate more modules into that so that they can generate a unique value for this. As of now, I can just go away with saying date dot now, and simply, there we go. We have just got rid of that in a very, very cheap manner. Surely we can actually, there's a semicolon, there's a comma. Okay, surely there are better ways of handling this, but right now my goal is to keep everything simple so that you can follow along and understand everything. Understanding is very important. So then this dot to do a value, this is how we actually fix that up, and is done. By default, we're gonna click it as false, but surely we can manipulate that later on. And I forgot a comma again, my bad. Okay, so this new item, which is in itself is kind of an object, is being up here. Now what we need to do next, we need to push this new item into the list of array or list of to-do types of array. So for doing that, it's pretty easy. Just access this list and just use a method of push. And then we are going to go new item. Surely there are more efficient ways of handling this, but right now we just want to do this. Once this is being done, I want to get out of this this if statement, and once everything is being settled and done, I want to call this dot to do value, and I want to mark it as empty. Why am I doing this? The reason for doing this is as soon as user actually enters anything and hit enters, that value is being now saved into the array, but nobody is clearing out that input box. So this is exactly what we are doing at line number 29. So there we go. Pretty simple, pretty simple. This add item is a pretty simple thing. Okay, another thing. So one button we have handled, which is add to do. Another button that we want to handle is delete, which is actually super easy to do only because we have this ID being associated with that. So we're going to call this as delete item. There we go. And there we go. So whenever a delete item is being called, we want that you should pass on an ID, which is of course a number. If I can write number. Okay, number, there we go. So this number is being passed on to us automatically when we have this delete item. So all we have to do now is we are already having a list of items that we are like looping through. Now we want to create another list of item which is not having the value equal to this ID. Pretty simple stuff. So we're going to say this dot list, and we're going to update this list with this dot list and apply a classic JavaScript method which is known as filter, which actually allows you to pass on any kind of a callback up here, callback function. So it's going to be simply looping through all the items that are present in the list itself, and just don't put one item which is following this criteria, which is item dot ID not equals to ID. So there we go. Pretty simple. In just one liner we were able to do that. Pretty simple, pretty basic stuff. And of course, don't forget the semicolon. Save that, and there we go. Delete item has done. What it's doing, it's actually rewriting the entire list, or kind of modifying this list and filling up all the values except the list which is matching, or the value which is matching this ID. Pretty simple, basic, classic stuff of deleting an item. There we go. So brain part is all done. Now we want to inject all of this functionality into this app component.html. So how we're going to do that? Now it's actually not a very big or kind of a rocket science. It's actually pretty easy. So first and foremost, I'm going to walk you through with how to add the button. So for having the add button, we just need to find that. If I can look at, there we go. At line number 15, we have got this add button. So we want to add a functionality. And here comes the tricky part about the Angular. the syntax of this injection is absolutely weird, and I'm totally with you on that part. For example, I want to add a functionality on this button when somebody clicks on it. So obviously, to invoke the event of the click, I have to use a pair of parentheses, and inside that I have to write click. How do I know it's a click? Of course, we have to read the documentation for that, and there are many other events that you can trigger. And this, you just say equals, and then you just say add item. And this add item, of course, with parentheses, is the same one which you have written in your app component. Remember this add item? This is exactly the same. Okay, so this is being taken down. How can we take down this delete button as well? It's almost a repetition. So we can go up here again, an event that I want to trigger, which is going to be just like that, click. And then we can just simply say equals, and then we have to mention that, which is delete item. And of course, we have to pass on the ID as well. How we're going to pass on that item is going to be a little bit tricky, which we are going to talk in a minute. I can actually shrink that, can I? Yep. Okay. So this, how we're going to pass on the item ID, we're going to talk about that in a second. First and foremost, let's talk about more stuff. Remember I told you that we're having this image and everything going on, all absolutely awesome, but we want to have this input as well. So this input is actually very tricky. I'm going to enter a lot of enters up here so that we can see what is happening on every single line. There we go. So in this, we need to enter. This input is the classic part from which we want to take input from the user and we want to fetch them. So for that, we have to first and foremost enter. Now here also, I want to add event, and that event is when anybody says that I want to use a key up, there's a key down and everything. So key up, enter. So anybody just press the key enter and just leaves that. I want to have a functionality. What is that functionality? And again, that functionality is again add item. We don't need to rewrite the code for that. There we go. Pretty easy stuff. So that's one event that I want to trigger. There is also one more thing which is absolutely important, that you want to inject a model up here. Now, this model can be a little bit tricky concept, but just understand that I want to inject this to-do value functionality up here. So notice up here in this, we are having this to-do value. So in order to have this to-do value in my app component, I want to use this. So this is an array, and kind of a module that I want to inject is ng module, which is coming up from the core of Angular. And that is going to be simply fetching the value to do value. So there we go. And of course, this to do value is going to be entering into the array and all those stuffs. So this syntax, this square brackets and curly braces, this is definitely weird, but I haven't even got started up here. Surely I would love to discuss and talk a little bit more, but this is a crash course and we're running a little bit out of the time. Okay. So this part is all good. Now comes up the repetition part, that what you really want to loop through. Of course, I want to loop through here. This list item should be looped through again and again. So how do we do that? And here I would like to welcome the king of the weird syntax, which is looping through. How do we loop through any item in Angular? We use an asterisk sign, then we use the classic prefix, which is ng, and then we use the actual keyword, which is for. Yeah, I told you, kings of the weird syntax. And then we use this like value assignment kind of a things. And then we say let item of list. Okay. This is absolutely bizarre, but what we're trying to do is we are trying to loop through each item of this list. And this is, when I first time saw that, I think, wow, this is something absolutely weird. Totally agree. Okay, once this is being done, what you really want to do is loop through the values which are inside up here. So in the input, we want to inject this couple of things up here. So in the input value, we can actually inject, the name is done, is all good. I'm going to hit an enter to just go on to the next line. And then comes up again, this weird same syntax, which we just saw. Whenever we want to have an ng model up here, we have to just go through with this weird syntax. And then we have to say, now this item, what we are looping through is having three properties, the all properties that every time we are creating a model, we are defining it. Remember ID, a value, and is done. Okay, so we are saying ng model, this is going to have an item. As soon as I put a dot, that means we are able to access that property. So that property right now is done. Okay, and then instead of this task one, I really don't want to have a task one. I want to inject a variable. So how do I inject it? Just like this. And I say item, dot value. This time I want to access a value. And once that is being done, another thing that is going to be used is ID. And remember, we are using ID to being passed in this method to delete the values. So I'm going to say item dot ID. So this is being used up here. So this entire list item, wherever we have actually injected this for loop, is going to be looped through this entire component. So this is going to be looped through again and again. Let's just save that and see if I have made any typo, because I'm pretty prone to make a lot of typos during. Okay, so I just noticed a small typo up here. I wrote this as ng module because I was getting in a hurry to talk about the modules. Anyways, I have written it correct here, ng model. So this should be ng model up here. Okay, now this is all good. So we have injected everything and almost everything is working fine. But now we need to talk about one final file which we haven't yet touched. So this is all injection is done. So we have done the brain part absolutely correct. We have done the modeling part of everything absolutely correct, to-do.ts, module.ts, not module, the component.ts and the HTML and CSS. But there is one file which we haven't yet touched, which is module.ts. So what is this module.ts and why we are just talking about this module and why we haven't yet talked about? So as I told you, in the Angular, we have a whole bunch of modules that you want to do anything, there is a module for it. And we can actually work on that. So let's just say you want to interact with the web. There is a module for it. There is a module for when you want to interact with a user and take some input from it. But the question is, you might be saying, hey, we have got this input, but we haven't actually done much up here in the input. So can we use directly these input? And the answer is no, you cannot directly use these inputs. You have to actually tell this Angular that I'm going to be using a module that's going to take input from the user and we have to work accordingly. For example, one of the modules that we are using is platform browser, and some of the modules that are coming up from the Angular core. So similarly, we have to actually mention that. So how do we mention that I want to use a module for the user input? So let's go ahead and do that. So for that, we have to first and foremost mention that I'm going to be using a module of Angular, which is coming up from the forms. So whenever you're using any form, even a single form, you have to come up here in the app.module.ts and have to mention that. And what do we call that? We call that as forms module. So there we go. So once this is being done, then we have to do certain things. Then we have to do certain things. Whenever there is a new module that is coming up, we have to be honest, actually, this actually ng module is divided into multiple parts. The first one is the declaration, then we have got imports, and then we have got provider and bootstrap. And this declaration is for all the components that you are creating. And actually, we don't touch that much often because Angular CLI automatically does that for us. So just put a comma, and if you're inserting a component manually, just mention this component here as well. If you're importing anything, any module, then you have to mention that module here, whether that's an HTTP module or maybe a module for handling APIs specifically, or maybe a module that is for forms. So we're going to just put a comma and we're going to say, I want to use a form module, as simple as it sounds. Then we have some of the providers as well. We're not talking about them because that is probably a little bit deep concept, and I think I would require another 15-20 minutes to explain that. And then we have this bootstrap as well, which is an app component. Now this bootstrap is not the bootstrap that we use for the CSS kind of a stuff. This is more of a bootstrap that helps us to bring up a template kind of a stuff. So this templating stuff that is automatically being rendered is actually coming up from here. Let's just save that, and hopefully I'm pretty sure I have made some of the other typos as well. So we're going to fix that up. Let's go back onto the page itself. Looks like I haven't made much. And we're going to go back up here. So we see a LCA to-do list up here, add a to-do, and we're going to add simply task 1 up here, and we're going to click on add, and there we go. We can see that task 1 is being added. Then I'm going to add a task 3, just click, let's just hit enter this time, and it's working fine as well. Let's just add a gibberish and a gibberish again and a gibberish again. And now I want to just delete the task 3, click on the delete, and that is gone, and automatically the list has been re-rendered. How that's possible? That's possible through the magic of Angular. We don't need to worry about the re-rendering of the component once your task is being done. Now surely we can talk more on to adding more features, like clicking here and editing that by using the ID. We can checkmark that and do some additional CSS for that. Again, there are a lot of components available in the Angular, but that is the most basic and the most simplest thing that you can follow. Now again, all of these exercise files are also available to you at learncodeonline.in. I hope you have enjoyed enjoyed this, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to do that. Now, I'm going to give you a challenge here. Now, I know some of you will not be able to do it, some of you will be able to do that, but again, in case you want to find out any other resources on the web or anything, now what I want you to do is, I want you to simply create a method that can not only delete this, but add a little bit animation while deleting it. For that, you have to read a little bit onto the documentation part of Angular, that how some of the animations can be done. So, and surely some of you can do that using just pure CSS as well. So what I want you to do is just click on this delete. Right now it's just deleting like poof, but I want you to delete it with a slow animation and something like that. If you're able to do that, just tag me up on Instagram at my ID. I would love to know that how you have actually done that. So that's it, a really long video for a crash course. That's it for this video, and it's a really long video. Make sure you hit that subscribe. It's actually worth it now. That's it. That's it for this video, and let's catch up in another one.